Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Amanda Click. I'm the head of research and instruction at the U.S. Naval Academy, and I'm the chair of the Instruction Section's Instruction for Diverse Populations Committee. I just wanted to take 30 seconds here at the very beginning to share that our committee has been making some changes recently, and we'll have a somewhat different focus in the coming year. We have a new charge and new projects like this webinar series, and a new name, the Inclusive Pedagogy Committee. So now I want to welcome you to what I know will be a fascinating webinar and hand this off to our moderator, Carlos Duarte.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I suppose, depending on where you are. So I just wanted to get you introduced today. So this is our Instruction and Outreach for Diverse Populations, Native, Indigenous Librarians and Students series. I want to take a moment to introduce our speakers. Today, we have with us Carrie Cornelius, Prairie Band, Potawatomi, and Oneida Tribe of Wisconsin. She's the acting supervisory librarian at the Haskell Indian Nations University. And then we'll have Kevin Brown, the Nez Nation from Chinle, Arizona. He is a program specialist at the Indigenous Nations Library Project at the College of University Libraries and Learning Services at the University of New Mexico. Up next will be Naomi Bishop, Akimel Otampima, Gila River Indian Community. She is a health sciences librarian at the University of Arizona College at Medicine, Phoenix. My name is Carlos Duarte. I'm of Pascua Yaqui tribe, and I'm the Outreach and Intergeneration Librarian at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I wanted to point out that you may hear some of our speakers using the terms Native, Native American, Indigenous, and Tribal throughout the course of this webinar. This is not to suggest that these terms are interchangeable or have the same meaning, but rather are a reflection of the various communities that we're all serving at these various institutions. As we're proceeding, I would like to remind you that you can add questions to the group chat and we will monitor them from there. And without any further ado, here's Carrie Cornelius.
Hi, thank you, Carlos. Saguli, bonjour. Greetings, academic librarians. I want to thank you for your interest today in the success of our Indigenous students. And I'm going to begin with telling a couple stories about our Indigenous librarians. And you can see their beautiful faces in this picture right here. And we begin by looking at our Indigenous librarians who brought us to where we are today. The beautiful Comanche woman in the middle founded American Indian Library Association, or AILA, in 1979 and served as president. This is Dr. Lotse Patterson, Professor Emeritus of the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Oklahoma. And she was referred to as the mother of tribal libraries in her Library of Congress interview. Dr. Patterson developed library training manuals and appropriated money to support library services to tribal communities where they never were before. In many Native communities, knowledge is traditionally passed down from one generation to next, which you can see in this picture. And next to Dr. Patterson is another president, former president of AILA, and that is Dr. Sandy Littletree, Indigenous Librarian Scholar, professor of University of Washington's Information School. Dr. Littletree furthers scholarship on Indigenous librarianship, and she details cataloging changes to respectfully curate Indigenous content in subject headings. And to the right is Naomi Bishop, also past AILA president and health sciences librarian at the University of Arizona. And you will get to see more of her in just a little bit. On our next slide, you can see that Dr. Lorene Roy, exemplifies a life of service. Dr. Roy sits in a red dress surrounded by only a small portion of her librarian family from across North America. Dr. Roy was the first Native American president of the American Library Association, or ALA, serving in 2007 to 2008. Dr. Roy has led a life of service through scholarship and hundreds of publications, mentorship through the Tribal College Librarians Institute, and also a past president of American Indian Library Association. She continues to foster a spirit of community and outreach as faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin School of Information. She works with veterans through the Reaching Those Who Serve program, which extends graduate programs in library and information science to veterans, and she supports literacy through the If I Can Read, I Can Do Anything program. Improving the lives of others. In 2005, at the University of Saskatchewan, Deborah Lee used her expertise in cataloging and archival skills to create the iPortal, an Indigenous studies research tool. Deborah Lee's iPortal has improved the lives of Indigenous researchers by respectfully curating and compiling over 65,000 full-text electronic books, articles, theses, and documents on First Nations and Aboriginal peoples of Canada. And our next slide. You can see that Indigenous librarianship is not just one role. It transcends boundaries. Erin LaFlamboy is a leader in providing library services to her patrons at an institution that functions not only as a tribal academic library, a community library, and it is also the tribal archive all at once. Erin not only creates reference guides and teaches others how to find information, as we all do, she's a skilled grant writer and has written a Blackfeet Language Preservation Grant funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Studies, or IMLS. She has presented at the national level for IMLS and ALA. And as you can see in her image above, Erin is willing to haul her personal lodge to community celebrations to connect the community to her library so that she may connect her community to the world. What are these tribal libraries? So the United States recognizes 574 sovereign tribal nations. There are so many more. 37 tribes have their own tribal college or university or TCU. TCUs join to become the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and we call that AHEC. You see that there are tribal librarians and Indigenous serving librarians all across North America to the northernmost tip at Ixablik College at the northernmost point of the United States. Now going down in the map, if you go towards the middle of the lower 48 in Lawrence, Kansas, is Haskell Indian Nations University. And that's where I am here today. Haskell is a government residential boarding school. It was established in 1884. So when you hear of Indian boarding schools, that is us. Haskell currently has 800 students, and all are from federally recognized tribes. And in fact, each semester we represent 140 to 150 different tribes here at Haskell. And you could read more about them by going to the AHEC link, or you could search our Haskell website. And I'd like to welcome you to our library. Haskell Indian Nations Tomani Library is about 40 years old, although we have history going back all the way to the very beginning of the 1900s. We pay for our student services and programming by a $100 fee that students pay every semester. And with that fee, we do our services. Our number one service is we provide textbooks to students. And in previous years, that was about the only service that we could do besides providing a space and for tutoring or computers. But now we connect Indigenous authors to our students and the students to the authors. We highly value that. We provide reference services using social media. We don't limit them on time. We make ourselves accessible 24 hours a day. And we extend our library services and programming through our partners within the Lawrence community, such as KU Libraries, and a shout out to them and their watch party. Thank you, KU Libraries. And the Lawrence Public Library, and now we are extending our program even to Kansas State University Library. So one of the things that we do within Tomani Library is really focus on indigenized content. Our collections are constantly growing with our Indigenous content. And some of these things you can do in your libraries also. 30 tribal newspapers are in our serials print subscription. And we do this through EBSCO. So we're able to provide the sovereign news of a tribe with their own voice, not other news people talking about a tribe, but the tribe's own voice. Our collection development has focused in very many different ways in the past by hitting hot topic issues such as the pipelines or other environmental concerns. But now we're trying to not only keep those hot issues, but to grow with very localized content of our tribal communities. We interview our faculty every year to see what direction we need to grow in order to support their course content. And we try to support our tribally owned vendors and native owned bookstores, such as Birch Bark Books and Red Planet Books in Albuquerque and Native Realities Publishing. We subscribe to Indigenous print journals. And a lot of people may ask, why do you subscribe to print? But we don't really trust that our databases will continually hold the titles that we value. And while instructing our students, we realize that research is very emotional. It's emotional having to do with the content. And if you are talking about something as common as the high suicide rates of within a community, you have to recognize that probably 80–90% of the students in the room have lost a very close family member through these issues. So being very caring towards our students. So many libraries changed from being an academic library to an Indigenous library within about the past few years. And the transition was in reality returning the space to the students. It was a giving back to them. And we did this by incorporating humanistic concepts that many of you probably can do or that you're already doing in your own university libraries. We like to ask our students their opinion, and very intentionally we listen and do our best to fulfill their wants. A lot of times I don't know how to figure out how to make something happen when they ask me, but I just say yes. And then it's up to me to find out how to make their projects happen. One example of this is a garden. Our library now has a garden in it, so we incorporate a lot of our natural elements in there. I make mistakes too when talking to my students, so I quickly apologize when I do make it or may hurt their feelings or may not be so sensitive to some of the topics. We really work at respecting history and respecting tribal sovereignty and humanistic values. Our students, when they come through the door, we recognize that they are an emotional being, they are a spiritual being. We try to accommodate their physical needs and also all of their intellectual needs, including some of the theories of how we teach in our pedagogy. We make ourselves accessible. I really had to lock my door right now just to make certain that someone doesn't come walking on in right in the middle of something, because they realize that they could come in and visit at any time of crisis. We also establish a lot of forgiving policies so that our students can continue on. Sometimes what may be just a very small challenge to us, it may be a large hurdle for them. So you can see, even with our space planning and programming, we've purchased items to help them keep their regalia strong. Our students can use sewing machines. This was one of the first years that we actually had some grant funding where people were making ribbon skirts in here. We've also had butterflies transform inside our library, and they enjoyed that process of coming out to check out a book and also checking out our butterflies. We've renamed collections to decolonize our library from Indian collection to Indigenous collection. and we've incorporated their art all around the library. So those are some of the ways that we have been working on trying to return our libraries to students. And I'm going to hand you off to Kevin. And Kevin at the University of New Mexico has been a leader to myself, because when I went into this position, I didn't know where to go. And that's how I met Kevin, was showing up at his library's door and checking out him and Paulita to help them show me the way.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for the kind introduction and introducing important topics and critical information. In terms of what was introduced by Carrie at the Haskell Indian Nations University, is similarly experienced at the Indigenous Nation Library Program, from here on known as INLP. INLP is situated in the historic Zimmerman Library at the University of New Mexico, from here on known as UNM in Albuquerque, New Mexico. UNM is a Hispanic serving institution and a Research One university. We have a distinct and dedicated Native American student service centers on campus, including the American Indian Student Services, and then in the Health Sciences, the Center for Native American Health, and in the Native American Studies Department, the Indigenous Peoples and Law Program, and now with INLP, a library research support. The shared experiences with Haskell that students face include navigating library and departmental resources, networking with other Native American and Indigenous students, seeking a comfortable learning environment that is safe for their cultural well-being, understanding their own Indigenous personhood while trying to stay connected to their home community. From this slide, I want you to pay close attention to the emotions expressed in this statement. And this is coming from a student in one of our community surveys. Pay close attention to particularly the lonely experience this student has encountered on campus. Now, if you can, pay close attention to what the student has expressed towards the library and INLP. Some key words that have jumped out to me include native hubs, community, and statements like feel safe and at home. And I quote, and statements like this, and I quote, I have found an academic home where I can freely share my thoughts and ideas towards native liberation. Other statements include, our thoughts and ideas are not as devalued as in other Western spaces, but cherished here. And another statement that I love, which includes, all of these ideas have offered a place to be unapologetically Indigenous. To me, that last statement reflects a time this student has experienced alienation on campus, or perhaps discrimination and racism. This feeling is also further compounded when most non-Native students are not aware of U.S. colonial history and current policies on Native American people, which stereotypes are assumed upon these Native students and potentially expressed in the classroom or said to them personally. In this slide, you also see our beautiful murals. The following murals were the first actions of indigenizing the space. Promoting an Indigenous visual semiotics in this space enabled us to promote our vision of community, knowledge, and service. Slide. Inspired by the voices of the students, INLP developed an INLP program space preamble, and also to rightfully acknowledge the land tenure of communities that call this Rio Grande Valley, River Valley home. We state, and I quote, UNM and INLP reside on the lands of traditionally Tewa-speaking peoples, including the pueblos of Isleta and Sandia, whose historical relationships to these lands exist to this day. This preamble includes policies relating to two key cultural sensitive policies, cultural agency and cultural shaming. Cultural agency is the ability to express themselves as they deem fit. Cultural shaming is criticizing a person's ability to perform their cultural practices. As you can see from our graphs, our average monthly headcount starting from 2011 into 2019 have increased every year. Furthermore, our program space layout of drop-in group study rooms promotes a communal learning model. Our study rooms have no time limit, so a student can stay in the room all day, and we have seen that happen. It gives students a place to be when they are not in class, and potentially a place to hide from those alienation experiences, and also a place to call home. During finals week, students have slept in the rooms, and I even saw a table hammock strewn across one of the tables with a student sleeping in it. And as I was making my rounds, I saw 5 toes sticking out from the tables. Having a cultural sensitivity policy also enabled other students from other communities to come in and enjoy our program space also. If other students are searching for culturally safe learning spaces, then we should listen to those students also. And I personally advocate for their spaces in your home institutions also. Slide. Creative activities that involve students to explore other aspects of communication are essential for growth and development. Our program activities always include a creative component to them. This photo and accompanying narrative are from a photo contest in which we asked students to produce a photo and a narrative centered on how they would indigenize UNM. This photo entry and narrative was the winning entry. It depicts students recreating a ceremony in our INLP social area near our book display. And some key sentences I love include, and I quote, "Indigenizing our spaces provides students an opportunity to continue to conduct themselves in a traditional way. Indigenizing is having access to our history, thoughts, and traditional ways of life." And finally, I love this last sentence, and I hope you take this home with you, which is, "We are bringing home with us. We are bringing ceremony to our studies." For me, this is such a profound thing to say. They are not shedding their cultural identity as they enter our campus spaces. They are bringing it onto campus, whether or not it is supported. Which leads me to the theoretical perspectives that I feel has been observed and enacted in our program. Slide. The theoretical perspectives and models that I'm presenting to you are coming from my perspective as a Dene man, a student from Chinle Unified School District, Tribal College alumni of the Institute of American Indian Arts, alumni of the University of Arizona, Bear Down, and doctoral student at UNM. I am also a professionally trained museumologist, archaeologist, researcher, and now a program administrator of INLP. The following perspectives of cultural interface model, spiritual ecology, and indigenous ecology are activated as an indigenous learning space. Also, I'm introducing an original idea centered on promoting an indigenous critical consciousness, specifically critical consciousness for holistic transformation. As for indigenous critical consciousness, this perspective is currently unfolding, as this is the very first public introduction of my ideas of this framework. This framework was developed to understand many incoming factors of student experiences and cultural interfacing their ideas and knowledge with what they are learning. Other perspectives include the intersection of information and spiritual ecological frameworks embodied in indigenous personhood. My perspectives as an archaeologist has informed me of taking an approach which is looking at time and how cultures interact through time, which is centered on indigenous information and knowledge frameworks, which were formulated by their own community and by their own family, which continues into the present. Student perspectives also form me in how their personhood is defined by themselves and by the outside community. And my program direction also enabled me to observe key factors of learning that are all very important in helping promote a key principle of critical consciousness. Slide. Critical consciousness in education was formulated by Paulo Freire in his seminal publication in 1973. As I was studying his approaches, this passage from page 18 stuck out to me. Critical consciousness as a praxis inevitably leads to critical understanding that leads to critical action. What I observed in his approach of thought precedes action has been the cornerstone of indigenous learning philosophies. Phrases like sa nage, peke hajon, which means lifelong happiness into old age in my Dene language, and thought is a learning framework for balance in time when critical action is needed. In this framework, what it's trying to do, and this is specifically what I think is my assumption, what it should do, is to develop critical agents for lifelong learning, to crystallize their identity so they can become confident and so they can develop their own form of emotional intelligence in the hopes of developing a lifelong learning framework. I also want to extend that these perspectives have been valuable in other indigenous communities also, and has been interpreted in their own language, and the philosophies that have been brought into action today. To formalize this process, specifically, I present the following diagrams for you to reflect upon. If you have any questions about these, please let me know. In the first diagram, Indigenous critical thought and praxis, this diagram is a source of indigeneity and Indigenous information and knowledge. First, land is a single source of information of knowledge. The uniqueness of land is that it is situated in space and place. Indigenous people reflect on that source of information and make it intimately known to their community. Second, language is a process of communicating these ideas and information. Again, the uniqueness of language definition makes these ideas personally known to a community. Philosophy is an interpretation of these ideas and information that is recognizable to their own community. Finally, culture is the external reflection and behavior of these ideas. Information is transmittable from people to people through artifacts, objects, performances, mannerisms, and behavior. People in this diagram are moving from land, language, philosophy, and culture. They are the carriers of this information and knowledge through time. People can disrupt this process because of their impact as carriers of flow of information. The loss of people or disruption of culture, especially with colonization experiences, can alter the integrity of this information. The next diagram is what I call personhood resilience. This diagram was influenced from my conversations I've had with students and reinforced from persistent studies of Native American students in higher education. Students have expressed to me in variations of this diagram, which instills resilience for them to persist in this lonely and challenging experiences in academia. The identity of the students are coming in onto campus is an inflection point of their own formulation of their own identity and those external to them. It is a paradoxical experience where they are defining themselves and being defined upon. Students are grounded in their identity, tend to rely on that as a source of strength, and seeking places to reinforce their identity, such as INLP. Family is perhaps the greatest source of strength for students. Having the ability to have family members to rely on for financial, spiritual, emotional, and cultural reasons is so important. Many credit their success in any success in their life to their family. Prayer as a source of resilience is interrelated to culture, but prayer as an action is deeply motivated by faith in some omnipresent force to seek guidance upon. Faith is key in this perspective. Culture, similar to prayer and faith, has some practices that students rely on, particularly the connection to other cultural members. Connecting to other students of a similar culture creates that experience of togetherness and alleviate the lonely experiences of the campus environment. This is a new concept that I'm introducing, which is the vectors of critical learning. I am borrowing concepts of epidemiology, such as vectors of transmission that spread the flow of viruses and bacteria, whether it is direct or indirect. Here, the vectors of critical learning are the specific metaphysical and tangible areas of learning that impact growth and transformation. Compared to the previous diagrams in which students arrived to campus with their own Indigenous critical thought and praxis, and personhood resilience, which is part of their own development at home, vectors of critical learning are what we can do to aid and have a dialogical relationship with students. The specific examples of each include Indigenous learning spaces, and INLP and the space that Carrie has created at Haskell are examples of that. Indigenous knowledge resources, meaning what is those Indigenous knowledge resources? Coming from an oral-based community, people are the carriers of knowledge, and oral history is the source of that, or the method of that transfer. So people are a big, big component of Indigenous knowledge resources, and that's is juxtaposed against books and other resources like that. So definitely having a balanced approach of Indigenous knowledge resources is important. Learning values and learning ethics. What are we teaching our students? You know, and then some of the students want to take some of this information back to their home community. So they're very altruistic with that information that they have learned. So developing learning values and learning ethics to support their altruism is really important, which leads to structured social and learning support services. What are your institutions looking like to help these students For us, I just named a couple of examples here at UNM. And then the curriculum and pedagogy. What does that look like from your perspective as educators? For me, in my INLP program administration role, I see curriculum as a big piece of this, and I'm hoping to formulate an idea to formalize what I call Indigenous information literacy, coming with these concepts from Indigenous critical thought and praxis and personal resilience, and I'm hoping to share with you with that soon. When you add all of them together, Indigenous critical thought and praxis, personal resilience, and vectors of critical learning, all of this equals to what I'm hoping to do, which is a holistic transformation. As I said before, thought precedes action, and using these skills for the rest of life is so important. And for me, as an educator, I think that's the true meaning of teaching and learning. To live a life of purpose, and particularly the education experiences of students is so fleeting for them, but the application of that knowledge as a lifelong principle is so important. So here's a working definition of what I think holistic transformation is. Holistic transformation is a process of developing intellectually autonomous critical agents for social and personal change by interfacing their inherent, and I mean their inherent Indigenous knowledge and personal resiliency to decenter power structures. This process includes students to be emotionally intelligent, to crystallize their identity in which they define, and to be confident of their Indigenous voice in any medium of their choosing. Slide. The process of holistic transformation has been initiated long before I even formalized this, this framework of Indigenous critical consciousness. It was a gradual process of visionary strategic planning that enabled me to realize a formal recognition of this process, which is deeply needed. As INLP progressed and developed, we have been operating under our original mission of INLP, which is to provide Native American library outreach and information literacy services to UNM community and New Mexico Native American communities, specifically outreach programming, UNM Native American student retention, and collection development. Today, INLP has expanded our efforts into three broad interrelated categories to promote holistic transformation. One, Indigenous learning, which is to support and culturally interface Indigenous information and scholarly content in a balanced approach. Two, Indigenous creation, which is to cultivate Indigenous ideas, arts, and knowledge for the benefit of the broader intellectual community. Three, Indigenous scholarship, to promote and bring awareness to Indigenous knowledge, publications, research, and ideas. And these are examples of the specific programming areas that we have done. Some of them are currently in progress right now, and the others are currently being defined and being created. I'll be sharing more of these program areas for you in part 2, which will be in May 14th. Slide. Finally, the Indigenous learning spaces as a model include these three critical perspectives. One, cultural interface. As you can see from the two stories of students at UNM, they feel alienated and alone. And obviously they're bringing their culture with them onto campus. This idea of culture interfacing them was introduced by Martin Nakata from an Australian context of providing services and incorporating Aboriginal Indigenous ways of knowing into the library. From the quote, "It is not the replacement of one with the other, nor undermining the other, but maintaining the continuity of one when having to harness another and work in interaction in ways that serve Indigenous interests." So students are interfacing with their professors, their chosen major, and the content they're learning to bring some of that knowledge back to their family, relatives, and community. The second, spiritual ecology, which was formally proposed by Santa Clara Pueblo professor Greg Cajete in his book, Look to the Mountain and Ecology of Indigenous Education. Students at this movement are negotiating their existence in the movement of these forces of the environment, their ancestors' use of those forces, and the current colonial policies that disconnect them from those spiritual forces. I summarized their behavior in my 2019 article, in which students and their indigenous existence is an intimate understanding of their existence, not in the moment, but the continuity of their ancestors' presence, meaning their ancestors' presence to them has never left. And their connection to their ancestors is so important for them, and they're seeking information to be good ancestors themselves. And finally, indigenous ecology. The last perspective was introduced by Lorraine Roy in her 2015 article, Advancing an Indigenous Ecology Within ILS Education. She was inspired by information ecology frameworks, and Roy recognizes that an indigenous ecology framework is moving within learning environments, especially when indigenous people are present. This is due to their connection to traditional knowledge, even if they are not intimately involved in specific knowledge systems in their community. Those perspectives are similarly situated with spiritual ecological frameworks, and that traditional knowledge is deeply embedded in those ecological channels, which means it is relational to them. Thank you for your attention. I'm available for questions and comments. At this time, I conclude my portion of this presentation, and I introduce Naomi Bishop, who is doing some awesome things at University of Arizona. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Zaktosh. I'm Naomi Bishop, and I want to introduce you to some of the things at different places that I've worked at. But before I talk about those things, I'd like to introduce you to a little bit about Native American Indigenous students in higher education. Identity is often difficult to track and watch in college and universities because participation rates of Native American students are not always tracked at all attainment levels, and identity is a complicated, complex process. There are 574 federally recognized nations and more state recognized nations, but students are who they are, and they have individual stories and needs. We also at US universities and colleges have First Nations students from Canada and Indigenous people from around the world attending our universities. 80% of Native American students attend in the US, attend public 2-year or 4-year institutions. And 17% of Native American students continue their education after high school compared to 60% of the US population. Just let that sink in for a moment. Slide, Carlos. So what do Indigenous student educational, social, and cultural needs look like? Like I said, I've worked at many different universities and colleges, 2 private, predominantly white institutions, and 3 large public universities. At each library, I've worked with a number of Native students. Students are there, and students are looking at the library for their place. Purposeful engagement that includes Native culture, language, and knowledge is critical. You don't need to worry about the overall numbers. The impact of a few may be the greatest of all. Some of the benefits, some of these programs and outreach that you do benefits all students and shows that there's a continued commitment for student success from the library to all students in all communities. So in these photos here, I just want to highlight 2 or 3 of them, but one you'll see is the corn growing. At Northern Arizona University, I worked in the sciences and engineering, and every time I walked to the engineering building and by some of the science buildings on South Campus, I would see the corn growing in the fall, and it was just so meaningful to me as an Indigenous person to see corn growing on campus. This was something that I was surprised at, but also very overjoyed and happy to see on campus. And it really was symbolic and representation for Indigenous people are still here, still living, and still thriving in our universities. The next picture I want to show you is that center picture, actually, and the one next to it of a computer screen with a mermaid. So at my time at NAU, I actually got to work with computer science students, and there was a club that wanted to do a coding activity for the Day of Code. And so we put out information to the community, and we invited folks into our space at the Learning Studio, and we planned lots of activities, and we've got food and a budget and everything. And then the day came, and we had 2 girls who were sisters show up as our only participants. We had more volunteers actually from the students that came to show their support than the students to participate. But with these 2 girls, it was great because as we reflected back on our program and how we could improve it maybe for next year or get more community members to come to Klein Library, we thought about two girls growing up, becoming engineers, and that brought us so much more meaning than just having a low attendance. So think about that and the numbers in STEM, women in science or women in computer science. These numbers are powerful and important. The last picture there that I'll highlight, actually two of them. One of them is special collections from NAU that was actually published in a book that was given to every fourth grader in the state of Arizona. This was some years ago. However, I did not connect this book that was published and given to every fourth grader in the state to NAU Klein Library Collections until I was actually working there as a librarian and was contacted by the mother of the girl who had published the book and looked at the end, and there was in the pictures all of the citations for all the materials that were used. That to me was education at its finest. Taking university collections and providing them and educating the greater state and the greater population through children's literature. The other picture there also is a poster on mascots. So at NAU, lots of students take an Indigenous Studies or American Indian Studies course. These students in these courses are not always, they're not native. They're all coming from all different backgrounds. So they usually have trouble looking for resources or want a native perspective on things. So they go to the Native Cultural Center, which is across the street from the library. I often would spend more time at the Cultural Center than in my office, talking to students and helping them with projects on Native people and Indigenous perspectives. I thought it was very important that Native students be protected from getting all the questions, and so that it would actually maybe be filtered through a librarian or someone that could actually present the information rather than having students who are Native having to share their personal experiences with their opinions about mascots or suicide or whatever it would be. I thought it was very important for me as a staff member to try to protect the Native students that we did have, but also educate in an important topics for the greater student body. Slide. So in 2018, an unfortunate event happened to a high school Native student as he was touring a college campus in Colorado. From this, there became a document from the American Indian College Fund. This document was titled Creating Visibility and Healthy Learning Environment for Natives in Higher Education. One quote from there is, "We believe that colleges and universities have the duty to cultivate an ethic of care in supporting Native peoples by listening, learning, and engaging with Native students, faculty, and staff." A couple photos that actually show some of this work here. The one just in the middle that I want to highlight is the lumberjack shirt on the right that was created by Follett, the bookstore company. Always in there. I walked into the bookstore one day, saw this t-shirt, and to me, I was just taken aback because this is something that I learned from talking to students and the bookstore folks. The sorority girls, it was very popular for sorority girls to buy this shirt, and it would be like kind of a hip knockoff sort of Native design. For me, that was very offensive as a Native person, and I thought it was not giving, it was a misrepresentation of Native culture. It was trying to be Native, but it wasn't actually designed by a Native artist. The shirt next to it, you can see, is Native language. This is a Dene Native shirt that was created for a basketball game that they held up on the reservation. One was done in collaboration with Native Voice and the other without. These things happen a lot on college campuses, and I've seen many, many cases where I've had to step in and speak up. I'm not afraid to step in and speak up, but I know it's important that allies and others on campus also recognize when you see or hear misrepresentations, stereotypes, or other things that you can debunk as a librarian, do it. Speak up and make a difference in the lives of all students. My job description doesn't always meet my daily job, but I try wherever I can to incorporate different aspects of Native learning. Native services, this is actually an Ithaca report on student needs in academics, and this is actually many of the needs also of Native students. And you can go and look at some of the reports, but I just wanted to highlight some of these and talk about the importance of a librarian's role in this and helping Native students navigate the library, the university, the community, and whatever their needs may be. think about your collections, think about technology. A lot of times streaming or other things that maybe happen, students, you live in a city where the cost of living and rent is higher than anything else, and students are paying for that. They might not even have a budget to pay for internet services. So, but all their work they're required to do is with the internet. So just think about those things and what you can do as a librarian to make a difference. Slide. So we are here and you can create your own ways of showing visibility and sharing information. I work in a medical library. I don't have very many Native students, but I do have a few. And visibility is really important for all students to see. So I want the future doctors of Arizona and wherever they go to know the homelands of Arizona and to know our history. I create a poster here with all the different 22 nations of Arizona, and then a lot of Native health resources that are out in the community. Also national resources on statistics and information, because that is the hard information to dig up and find. I know, I've done it many times. Just the other day, I was looking up epilepsy in the Native community in pediatrics for a resident at Phoenix Children's Hospital. And it was very, very difficult. And actually, there was not a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, this is often the case with specialized topics or information where Native Americans are just considered other in many of the studies and data that's represented. The other picture there is Native languages being expressed. The New Hayden Library at Arizona State University is working on a display as you come in the library that is greetings in Native languages and hello. Just making that space feel welcoming, even if you can't offer an entire room or even though space is super important. What things can you do even if you have constraints or you don't have a lot of space? I don't have a lot of space, so I do a bulletin board. And not just in November, I try to put these resources out on display all the time so that students know exactly where they are. Slide. So we are not all the same. Like I mentioned with statistics and data, it is very difficult to find information, but I want people to know that information about us is not all the same. You can see in these pictures, these are actually done by NAU students when they have their annual Stew Fest on campus. You can see that they actually draw on paper and create the tablecloth for guests to visit. And there's lots of different tribal nations that are represented here. You'll also see two that have the man in the maze. Some O'odham people are similar in language and culture. However, they are different communities and have different histories and relationships with the federal government as sovereign nations. In highlighting all of this, we are really trying to let other librarians know that support goes beyond the library. You can volunteer and work with student groups on campus. You can attend powwows and events. You can help organize. One of the most impactful things that I've ever experienced in the library was at the University of Denver, which has a complicated history, but they've actually been trying to address it. And when I went to interview, I actually saw pictures of Native people on the walls, and it was an exhibit called Real Life Indian by Vicki Eagle. She was a graduate student on campus, and she had created this exhibit taking pictures of people in Denver in their regular clothes, everyday life, explaining who they were, what nations they were from, just through photography. And that was on display outside of the dean's office in the library. And I just stood there in awe. I was like, yes, this is the kind of place I want to work. I want to work where there's welcoming environments and there's representation and visibility for students on campus. No place is perfect, and there's always room for improvement. So please join us next time as we do part 2 here in May. But I want to share some references, and then I think, Carlos, we're ready for some questions. And there is a document that you can actually get the references in the handout and also take a survey afterwards. So Carlos, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna start my video again. So at this point, it doesn't appear that we have any questions from the chat, but I would like to thank Kevin Brown, Naomi Bishop, and Carrie Cornelius. Our contact information is listed here. Please feel free to reach out if you have something you'd like to talk about. We will be having a second webinar where we're going to discuss a few more issues, and I'm about to let you know what that is, but I just want to reiterate that'll be on Thursday, May 21st at 2 p.m. There's a very short URL listed here. Will make sure to click back to this page, so if people want to take a picture of it, they can find it. But for next time, we're going to have a short discussion, actually about an hour, so I don't know if that's short to you or not, but how you can support Indigenous students in your own institutions. So we'll touch on land acknowledgements and how to make sure that they're meaningful, how to return Indigenous spaces to our students and scholars, how to think about visibility in our collections, programming, and teaching, how to reach out and maybe think about position descriptions and ways to support Indigenous librarianship and the American Indian Library Association, as well as lots of other things. Okay. Megan, I believe you had a question for us. Okay. Okay, can you share the link for the Google? Yes, okay. The question is here. The question was regarding our additional resources and our slides. So I believe you can find that at this short URL here.
I see a couple questions in the chat box, Carlos. There's one.
Okay.
Do immigrants and Indigenous students work together? Both are discriminated and may be out of place.
Okay, actually, this is something that I would like to address because we see a lot of that here at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I think it's important to address the fact that many immigrants are in fact Indigenous peoples, and that once you cross a border into the United States, you may have had that Indigenous label stripped out of you. So you may belong to a people from, say, Mexico or Guatemala, but once you come into the United States, you're considered a South American. So here on our campus, we're actually seeing a lot of our ethnic affinity groups working together to try and cross those boundaries. So we have our Asia Pacific Islander group working with our Latino student group, Latina student groups, to address the fact that they may have overlapping indigeneities. Another question was, in the Native American Studies courses, do any of the instructors utilize race-based affinity groups? Have you experienced any of that? Any other speakers?
So one of the courses with our Native American Studies department uses tribal critical race theory. It was proposed by Brian Brayboy. They use that as a foundational course it's meant for education, but they use it as a foundational course for other areas, especially with political systems and systems of power, and looking at those systems of those structures of power and looking at it from a critical race lens. But this one's coming from an Indigenous perspective, from our Indigenous histories related to the CIB perspective, reservation policies related to certificate of Indian blood policies, enrollment, and now there's a movement of should we even acknowledge blood quantum as a big part of our enrollment. So yes, that is used a lot in Native American Studies, but this one particular paper by Brian Brayboy is one of the most cited. It's called Tribal Critical Race Theory in Education. It's from 2005. Yep.
Okay. There was two more questions. I want to get them in order. This is to everyone. Is it tiring to always teach non-Indigenous people about Indigenous stuff?
Thanks for that question. I would say yes. However, it depends kind of where I'm at. When I'm at home in Arizona, I feel like it's very relevant to the students that are studying in Arizona to know this. When I'm studying other places, it's sometimes difficult for me because I'm not from those communities, and so that history is different. You know, that culture is different, and so it's hard for me to share with others about being Indigenous. Maybe I can relate to an urban environment having grown up in Phoenix, but it's hard to talk about maybe a different community. When I lived in Indiana, they were asked, I went to the Potawatomi powwow, and it was just so different sometimes for me from my home community that it was very hard for me to even speak about it. So I would go and I would observe and participate as invited, but I wouldn't really know a lot to say. I think I get revitalized by things like this, where I'm able to share to a wide audience of folks, and also seeing more and more in the literature and seeing more and more citing and knowledge being visible and apparent. It gets easier and easier as more stuff is published and put out there. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, and another question was, Indigenous knowledge sharing involves giving protocol. How is protocol reflected in knowledge sharing in libraries?
I might jump in at that one as the reciprocity. So thanks, Manisha, for all that you do in Canada or University of Alberta. We gift a lot, and even the elder scholars that, or not even elder scholars that I mentioned earlier, I was certain to give them tobacco gifts for everything that they've done before us. So those were mailed out as before this presentation, just as thank yous for everything that they've done. But not taking, going up to somebody and just expecting to receive knowledge or traditional information, or even recognizing the different levels of the sacred part of knowledge compared to general knowledge or tribal knowledge. So there's a lot to learn in that category.
I think going along with protocol is permission. And if you are working with a particular material or type that is, you're not sure about something, you know, go and seek out permissions from a tribal community, be very cautious and aware of what you're doing, be very critical, because lots of anthropological or other texts or things may not be our perspective at all. And some of it may be actually there in the language, but it's very much an important piece to our work, and it's very, that's I think why I would always go across the street to the Cultural Center, was to be grounded and really steadied before going into working to like a big teaching with science or engineering, where there's maybe not as much of the same understanding, maybe a discussion maybe about engineering and the mountain and different places or environmental things that were happening at that time, to just try to stay grounded and understanding what was happening around me.
Okay, we're getting close to time and we still have a couple questions, so I hope nobody minds. I'm going to read them. I'm kind of going to shorten them. Kevin, how did you get the library to allow smudge burning?
So that smudge and study program is actually it's kind of a philosophy of research as ceremony, approaching research and your studies from a ceremonial perspective, being diligent, planning, and all that. With that being said, the smudge aspect, it's not approved in our library. I wish it was. That would be awesome. But with the history of Zimmerman Library, there was a fire incident in the 2000s, so there's a big restriction on that. But we are in a very what I call an open environment campus. There's a beautiful duck pond adjacent to us, and that allows for smudging rituals to happen. And we have plazas nearby and outside seating areas. So it's we have places on campus to smudge, and we do offering what we call smudge packets. So like little sage bundles and all of that, with some little words of advice or inspirational quotes on that. So. Yeah.
Okay. And this one is to everyone. When allowing students to essentially express their cultural knowledge, how do you protect that student from becoming the official spokesperson for their entire culture in a predominantly white space?
So I think this is really important. I think that faculty and administrators need to have awareness and training on understanding how to support students and how to have, you know, classroom management where you allow students to share if they'd like to share, but not be pointing out students. And when students do express or have had some of those negative experiences, I know at DU, there's always education professors asking for students to go and speak. having a representative from the university go with the students, or having those questions prepared beforehand if there's a panel or something, helps protect those students, because they're saying they're just going to speak maybe from their own perspective about this one thing. So I think always being there to support students and being there as an employee of the university to actually take care of the student, and also offering counseling and other things, making sure students are aware of those services that are on campus. That's an important part of also just protecting them, or if they've experienced something that maybe has been bringing up trauma or other bad experiences, to make sure students are referred and taken care of with counseling or student campus environment services.
Okay. I would actually like to add one thing to this particular question, which was about how do you protect an individual from having to answer every single question about their own culture. When we've had Indigenous speakers come to my particular library here at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, I've made a point to introduce them and to remind the audience that the speaker is here to speak about their areas of research or from their own personal perspective, and that any further questions regarding tribal sovereignty, essentially indigeneity across the United States, can actually be redirected to the research assistance desk. We are at libraries, and we can often direct like the public's questions towards books that they can read on their own before they ask every individual Native person they know to explain their entire life to them. Okay. One other question. In library schools, Indigenous students are teaching library services for Indigenous courses. What do you think about white professors not being confident about teaching Indigenous courses? Trauma. How is this handled in libraries? That's a very big question.
I think that's its own webinar in itself. White professors not being confident in teaching Indigenous courses. I feel like if you are a faculty member and your content or your criteria, I mean, I'm speaking from maybe the STEM or sciences or medicine, there are opportunities when you create your syllabus or your course to invite guest speakers and lecturers, but also it's on you. You have to educate yourself, and you need to do the reading. There's lots of literature out there. There's lots of support. So you can prepare and understand what direction you want to go. As a faculty member, you have that kind of leeway to create the course. So that's what I would say.
Okay. And there's one question that I think everyone probably should get a chance. It says, triggers, how is this handled in libraries? And I'm assuming this means how do we deal or work with students who have experienced or maybe have been triggered by re-experiencing historical trauma?
That's an interesting question, because through our experiences here at INLP, there's a community understanding of trauma. So it's kind of a shared leveraging of trauma and offloading onto another person. Myself as a program administrator, I have an open door policy similar to Carrie, and they come in with anything they have. And obviously the biggest thing is to listen. Definitely listen, and not take yourself out of that moment and be in the moment with that student or even another colleague if that happens. But again, there's a process. Again, I want to relate it back to ceremony to this. There's an opening and then there's a closing. So whatever you do with someone coming into your center or your office is to make sure that that the wound is closed. Whatever it's open to them, expressed to you, make sure you close it, but also to be as informed as you can with support networks on campus. We have a student health and counseling center that's pretty good. I know them personally, so I reach out to them. And I don't try and be their counselor too. I also know my boundaries because I don't know where to go, but also I refer, and I do a warm handoff if need be. I'll escort a student to said center. But I always check in, and always make myself available in the future. And I create the environment here on campus where everyone with my student employees that I train, that they understand not to be ready for trauma, but also to how to navigate it, but also how to refer those students to resources also, and then to me. So.
Okay, at this point we're over time, but I think that some of the questions that are continuing to pop up, or if you may feel that they are perhaps unaddressed, we will be sure to incorporate that into the part 2, which will be Thursday, May 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'd like to thank everyone for giving us your attention and for taking the time to listen to us and giving us this opportunity. Thank you all, especially everyone out at ACRL who helped organize this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, folks. That was just excellent. Carlos, great moderating. Everybody else, excellent content. Super. Thank you so much. Was everyone able to see the resource document?
I did. I added an additional resource on there. I forgot
Yes.
to, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you all have access to edit it if you want, so that you can drop anything you want in there. But it will require a Gmail, right? So I think I set it so that if you have a Gmail and you log in with that, you should be able to access and add whatever you want to it.
Okay, great.
I will make sure that we get the chats here so that we can look at questions that maybe